Hello world from Oktopost headquarters. This is Radically Transparent, Oktopost's original podcast show on B2B Marketing Now. I'm Jennifer Gutman, Director of Social Strategy, and in most episodes of this podcast, we'll feature B2B marketing leaders who will share their radically transparent truths behind being a modern-day marketer and what it takes to grow ideas, take risks, and impact change. Joining me on this episode of Radically Transparent is Michelle Huff, CMO of UserTesting. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thanks. So happy to be here.
We're excited to have you. And I just want to make a little disclaimer to our audience who have been with us through thick and thin. In the background, you may hear my toddler. I explained to Michelle earlier, he currently is transitioning from a crib to a toddler bed. So for any of you parents listening out there, I'm sure you know the journey. So I assure you all is good. If you hear a little cry, that is what is going on in the host headquarters. So with that, back to user testing and our podcast. Michelle, I'm really excited to have you on the show. I've been following you on LinkedIn. Big things are happening at user testing. And I figured we'll start off with an easy question. Could you give us a little bit of insight and backstory behind user testing and how you found yourself there?
Sure. So maybe one of my favorite stories about the founding of user testing, the founders, Dave and Daryl, Dave, when they would always try to build, for example, like websites, you're always trying to get feedback, right? Input from your customers, from your prospects. This is relevant. Do you like this? What do you think? And so he would stand in grocery store lines because he had a captive audience. And he would ask just random strangers, like feedback and kept thinking there had to be a better way. And so they started user testing, which really provides anyone the ability to quickly target an audience and ask them any types of questions, and you get results within 2 hours. And basically, you can
Where do you sign up.
I know, right? And it gives you this way to really see, hear, and think like your customers experience what they're seeing, and you see where their struggles, where their delights, how they're thinking about problems. And so it can be really transformational when people build products, look for innovation for marketing, campaigns, messaging, all these different types of things can be so helpful for people and for building designs.
Wow. So from grocery store lines to a platform, that is pretty impressive. And with you as CMO, I'm sure you've got big plans. 2021, we are now here. Could you share a little bit maybe with us today about your strategy on how you plan on driving user testing forward into this new, or maybe not so new anymore, changed world?
Yes. And so, I started with user testing about 2.5 years ago, partway into their journey. And we have been just growing like gangbusters. And we crossed the 100 million mark last year, which is pretty awesome. Yes. And so it's been a fun ride. And one of the, I guess maybe on, driving user testing, one of the ways I think about marketing, especially in B2B marketing and enterprise selling, it normally starts where you have a salesperson, developer, as you keep growing, we're all overhead, but we're all trying to get like the salesperson to sell as much as they can, developers to build as much as they can for the right audiences. And so, we're really this department of scale. We amplify, we help align with the CEO and the head of people on how to be the voice of the company, right? And how do we amplify that message? The other part of it is aligning with sales on, I like to make sure that, it's not their number, it's our number. And we have people dedicated and focused on trying to hit our bookings growth. And since we're SaaS, a huge part of it is not just that first deal, it's all the renewals. And so I have teams kind of aligned with our customer success on how do we drive adoption and how do we amplify that message and get people to really renew, and then aligning with my CTO around the product. And so how do we bring the product to market? Which ones do we go after? How do we think about the total addressable market? And so what we're really driving, I feel like at user testing is really trying to take this business and grow it and amplify it in many different ways. And just my, when I first described user testing to you, if you can think about all the reasons why people want to actually speak to customers or potential future customers, there's so many different use cases. It's small companies right? Usually they have a hard time because most people don't want to talk to them. They're trying to figure out, how to get a hold of people, get feedback to huge companies, industries, different departments and teams. And so really what we're trying to do is continually broaden our reach and our scope to really take more advantage of the market.
It's really interesting. So prior to being in marketing, I was 10 years in sales. So when you're describing this type of platform to me, I'm like, wow, I wish I had this when I was in sales, right? Because on-demand human insight, I mean, that's pretty priceless. And I think today when we're all about building that people-to-people connection and being authentic and right, a lot of the themes that came from 2020 that we see continuing onward into 2021, I feel like this human insight could have been so helpful in my sales career. Fast forward to today, would you be able to share a little bit about what you have learned from user testing by looking at the human behaviors or anything as like stand out that you're seeing that maybe us audience listening in, we're dying to hear what have you learned or what can you share with us about those human insights?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when I first, because there's different ways. I mean, we're all market, like we all figure out ways to talk to people, right? So it's not like people don't talk to anyone. You just use proxies, like you talk to your sales team, you talk to analysts, or you use an excuse to go to the trade show so you can just be talking to people, practicing your pitch or your message or working with people. And it's trying to get that type of feedback when you need it can be hard, right? And so, I remember when we were looking at different companies and finding user testing, I was like, where have you been my whole life? I just didn't realize that this was possible or that existed. And so it's been really fast. It's been amazing, watching customers, what they've learned, but even internally, we've been using it a ton. So, this year was hard for a lot of people in the fact that, it's hard to just know who your customers are, but a lot of them actually changed, right? And so, maybe one really simple one that we did was we had last year spent months driving this whole CX industry survey. We've been doing it for...
I was going to ask you because I follow you on LinkedIn and anybody listening, if you want to follow someone interesting on LinkedIn, follow Michelle. But I saw you posting about surveys and I'm hoping this is where you're going with the story.
Yeah, well, we can talk a little bit about that. Okay. But we did a CX industry survey and we had done the whole thing and we were getting ready to promote it in February. And that's when everything started changing, globally across the world. And suddenly, between the time frame of us promoting it and getting it ready, just so much had changed. And so we were going through all of the data again to figure out, like, is this even relevant anymore? Are we putting out information that like people look at and go, this was so, 2019, this doesn't even apply. But you invest all this time. And so, one little thing is we actually ran a few tests with different segments of our market, just wanting to get their feedback. Do they find this stuff still interesting? And we wrote a forward that tried to address a little bit, and we wanted to see, like, did that hit the right note? Did it go too much, too far? And so, I mean, basically what you do is you can either hop on a call, just like, how we're talking, or you send little tests. And so we would get them to read some of the data and read the forward, and then they would think their thoughts out loud. We'd ask them questions. What do you think? Is this relevant? And then you hear people talking. They're like, yeah, or, just one person was like, right now, one of our main audiences too are designers. Like, there's a lot of people who are going on furlough right now, and just, I don't know, it's just so helpful to have people's kind of raw emotions and you better understand it. So much of what we do is trying to make sure that what we say resonates with other people. And it's so hard when you don't know how they would react, especially when everything changes. So, it seems like a simple story, but we continually did things like that and what would actually be a good message. We just released commercials last year, and sometimes you're like, is this funny or is this just funny to us? And so we got to watch, while we were building them, we would take different cuts without it being branded, and you'd see them pop on and see their faces, and then see if they laughed or not.
If they laugh, like, were you?
Yeah, we actually posted on YouTube our commercials and some of our favorite reactions, but some of them, you're always looking for the confirming stuff, but some of it can be really, informative because you're like, oh, that completely missed it on people, or they're having a struggle. We should change this. And so it kind of helped us iterate along the way.
That's incredible. And I think one of my biggest fears, in 2020 was being tone deaf. And this leads me into my next question in terms of, right, we're in such a strange, interesting time. And I think there's a lot to keep us up at night. Yeah, earlier I shared my toddler, but we'll switch into your baby in the back. But what keeps you up at night professionally, Michelle? And what you shared prior with the human behavior. Are you on point? Is the brand on point? Are people reacting the way you would be reacting? That would keep me up at night. But could you share with us, if there's anything at all professionally that when you go to bed has you up?
Yeah, I've got the young kids too. So
yeah, right. I mean,
I know. I don't know. It's interesting. I back in my 30s, to be totally right, if we're radically transparent. I mean, there were.
I love it.
I was one of those people that would wake up at 2:00 in the morning mulling over something, and you just sit there thinking about should you done it different? Should you done it this way? Should you said it this way? And kind of it would keep me awake at night. And
paralysis by analysis.
And I've learned to let it go and tell myself to fall asleep. It's great. So I mean, I tried to move beyond that, but things that do work. I mean, what I'm sure many people listening, especially if you are, leading a department, leading a company, and we're kind of carving out a new space. There isn't another vendor that we watch that we kind of try to do what they're doing, but do it better. So we're really carving a new path. And so there's all these things, you make all these calls and these decisions, and you're kind of wondering, am I doing the right thing? And so there's also that underlying, current where are you placing the right bets? Are you actually, and so sometimes you just have to let it go. But I'd say that those are things that continue to knot me, across all the different years.
No, they're valid. They're very valid. And I think, when you get into leadership and I think to a woman in leadership, I mean, to me, that's very inspiring to be sitting here interviewing a fellow woman, a CMO. I think that's incredible and definitely worth keeping up at night. But no, thank you for sharing that insight with us. And maybe for some of us who are in the career path, maybe to becoming CMOs or aspiring CMOs, what would you say is the best part of your job of being CMO?
I love it. It's funny. My head of sales, David, and I were good friends, and he's very goal oriented. Not surprising for sales, and it used to just completely blow him away when I told him I never sat down when I was younger and said I want to be CMO one day, and here's what I'm going to do. And there's definitely some people who are very goal driven, and I love that, but that was never me. But I really love it. It's been something that along the years. What I think I like the most is I've always loved variety. And so I love in marketing just the different types of teams and things that, from more of a technical driving the website and the whole experience to thinking about the brand and how you're building experiences to all the messaging. My background came through product marketing. So
I'm going to say, look, let's dive into your background a little bit. Maybe that will help. So what was the path you took to becoming a CMO, right? And even in today's modern day marketer, there's so many aspects. There's the technology part, there's the strategy part, there's the creative part. Is it an art or a science? So let's talk to us. How did you get to become CMO?
Yeah, well, it's looking back, I love the path that I took. So I first started off years and years ago, actually, in web marketing, but my roots all came through technical marketing, which turned into product marketing. So, back in those days in the late 90s, people didn't know what to call the role. And so I remember the emergence of product marketing, but I'd always really been in technology and continued to kind of elevate and grow along the way and take on kind of different roles and responsibilities. But what I liked was, I started off in a really small, 30-person company, and then watched that kind of grow. Then I was kind of in more of a mid-sized company that grew to 600. And we had the tech bust, and we all dropped to 200. And we grew again to 600. We were acquired by Oracle, which then I was there, and they were 80,000 people. When I left, it was 120,000. And then I went to Salesforce, which was 8,000 at the time I started, and they were like around
And they're,
24,000.
I'm going to say that, like, they're up there now.
Yes. And then I went to Acton, and then here at User Testing, and Acton was another mid-sized company. And I think my journey, two things that I liked about it was it gave me a really good perspective of different sizes and scale of technology companies, right?
Okay.
Because they all have different levels of investment, different roles. There's different dynamics when you're 80,000, versus 80.
Yeah.
But having the ability to see what it looks like when you get to that size is really helpful perspective. But then knowing, you just have to roll up your sleeves and be scrappy when you're smaller while you're growing. And so like, it's just kind of knowing that's been helpful. And then I think while not deliberate, when I started off with the types of companies I've worked for, a lot of them were all like marketing based. So like knowing all the details of web marketing. My first technology was about building websites, and then later
Relevant.
it was more. Yeah, and then later Oracle over time was like portals and web applications and
Relevant.
content, and then CRM. At Salesforce, there's obviously CRM and sales and lead management, but a big part of what I had was data. And so, obviously data drives so much in marketing, but how you actually think about carving territories and how that like translates to how you find leads and the accounts. So, having to position and speak to all the buyers and why that's important was just really helpful for me. And then Acton with marketing automation.
Yeah, we were huge fans of Acton, as you know.
Yes, and then with user testing, and I don't know, it feels like the cherry on top, because so much of this has always been about not the technology, but about the customer and what they think and their problem set. Because you're really ultimately just solving problems, and so having a way to really think about how people talk to customers and bring that into everything you do has just been fascinating. So I've kind of used the size and scale of company, the technology I've worked on, but then also the roles that I've led to really help me, just apply that to being a CMO. And I love the variety, and I find organizations fascinating. So I love seeing how other departments function and work, and how we all work together to drive towards a goal. So I kind of geek out on that stuff.
I'm with you. Would you prefer one size over the other, or recommend, or like, do you have a favorite size company to be a part of, or is there, good in all of them? And
yeah, well, there's good in all of them. In the sense that, I love having the perspective and the experience from each of the different phases. I would say maybe since the last two I've been in the mid-size, one of the reasons why I love, we're right now at User Testing 600. When I started, we're about 250. And I love, just coming from when you're at the 20 something thousand, even if they're like amazing cultures, when you get so large, there's so many products and product lines and portfolios, and just people only have so much bandwidth to pay attention to things that there's kind of this internal focus you kind of get over time. And what I love about this size is that, we're all in it together. It's us against the world. The world's not always nice, but at least we're all doing it together. And because it's more focused and purpose driven, and you get to really shape. At this size, you can feasibly meet everyone, and I love that.
So feasibly meet everyone, I think is definitely, Oktopost, we're also on the smaller side, and I could definitely attest that I know everybody in the company quite well. And even the newer employees who are starting in the work from home movement and the lockdowns, right? It still gives you the ability to really get to know someone, even if it is on Zoom. I can't imagine in a 20,000 something company how they're managing to do this, which my hat goes off to them, because I know it's not so easy. But I definitely would agree that again, going back to that people to people connection in a smaller company, I do think there is that special magic. We call it at Oktopost. We call it Octo magic. But
I love it. Octo magic. I love it.
But speaking of that, I want to switch over a little bit. Something that I feel I've learned in my career is that failures are an inevitable part of success. and maybe not at the time recognizing it was a failure, or maybe in retrospect, like, oh, maybe I could have done that better. But is there anything that you can recall in your career or in your journey that you feel might have been a failure or not go the way you had planned then, but looking back, kind of like, oh, wow, that's really something I needed to be successful today, or I wouldn't have been where I am today if this didn't happen?
Oh yeah. I mean, failure is it's a part of everything.
Yeah.
It's like, but in many ways, I think you learn better from failure, right? It's so easy when something is so successful to look back and just say, "Oh, I know why. It's because I did this and we did this," and
Right.
and you kind of, you think about it a little bit, but not that much. When things don't go the way that you anticipated, I think you spend a lot more time like analyzing all the different things, and I think there's definitely initiatives where I feel like maybe I went the wrong direction, and you learn how to change it. There's ones that I learned over my career. I mean, it's so hard when you pop in the leadership role in a new company, because you're trying to learn the company, learn the value prop, learn like the network of people, but you're also trying to grow your team, build your team, set the direction, and there's that moment where it just gets super intense and overwhelming in some sense. You need to like build the plan, and I think,
right, that's a 2021 plan. What's your plan? What's your plan? What's your plan? Talk about your plan. We're going to get there.
Once you have the plan, you start feeling better, because then at least you're like moving to, you can start iterating. But there's the one thing that I learned in retrospect, and I've started to try to apply it over the years, is how to better leverage a network and build a network internally.
Okay.
Because when you go in, especially when every time you take on new things, you're taking on new roles that you might have never led before or been in, or, and suddenly you're like leading it. And so you have more questions than answers. And I think sometimes when people early in their career, they take on they think that they're supposed to know it all, right? Like if you're leading it, you should be the expert at it. And so it's intimidating to admit you don't know, or to ask questions or get feedback and from other people. And I'd say like, have a personality where you're always trying to learn, use everyone like your network, and try to build connections, not just internally, but externally. So, because there's always those moments where you're like, what do you do? Like, or do you do this? And do you really spend this much? And like, do you, because there's all these questions that like, you don't have answers for. So I'd say like, that was like a big learning aha moment that I think I've had over the years.
Thanks for sharing that. I think that's, out of all the guests that we've had on our show, I think that's one of the most human responses to that question that we've had. So thank you for being radically transparent on that one. So kind of maybe a similar, or kind of taking that lesson, but is there anything specifically that you have learned in 2020 that you'll be taking with you into 2021 that you feel will really help mold your team into this next year?
Yeah, well, one thing that we've been trying to build out a better cadence. I think when you're really small and scrappy, I felt like when we first came in, it was just trying to build the functions, right, and start like doing things, and then over time we were building like the foundation, and more of like the processes, and now we're trying to like build upon that, so we can actually better coordinate, better scale. One of the things that we spent a lot of time doing was around how do we be the best use case of like of our own solution, and it doesn't even just be the solution, but are we really actually talking to customers and prospects and bringing that into what we do? And so there's all these things that we built through last year that I'm excited about, like that kind of takes it into next year, where we now have all these dashboards that show how many people on the team are actually running tests. I have created like my all hands meetings where people take time to actually share some insights and learnings. And so, for example, like for all hands, what we'll do is we'll break apart and into different groups, and then have people like we built what we called empathy maps for the last all hands. And so we had several interviews with different.
The interview, this is all part of an empathy map. We're going to break it down.
Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Empathy map. Yes. So most marketers think of personas, right?
Okay,
like personas, and then you're like, hey, here's your title, and here's like their role, and all these different things, and so helpful. But what an empathy map, it kind of came through design. So a lot of designers have seen it. But an empathy map says, what does a person think versus feel versus say versus do?
Whoa.
And and it's a whole different lens, right? And if you're trying to actually think about how do you connect at more of an emotional level with someone, knowing that's important. And so it gives kind of a framework. And so we broke out into our 4 different main kind of personas in a sense. And we had several videos from tests that we'd run in the past. And the teams just took time listening. And we had a mural, I think the little virtual whiteboard. And so people would take notes around their observations, like, how is this person, they'd ask questions and you could feel you could see their hesitation. You could see what they were concerned about. And so we would note that. And so it kind of really helped bring to life and have a discussion. And then we came back again and then shared some of our insights with others. But we're on this, what I'm trying to roll out. I want an interactive this year empathy map. So anyone who starts with user testing can join in, learn about who our main audiences are, and be able to bring up little videos and actually hear how they're thinking about things or how they're feeling about it. So we've started to build a lot of the foundation, but I'm looking forward to this year kind of fully building it out.
You're giving me a lot of food for thought for Oktopost and maybe bringing empathy maps into our strategy. I mean, I think that is especially, it's great timing, right? When we're all talking about really understanding our customers, being where our customers are, and taking it more than just, right, like we said, the buyer personas, but really what the thoughts, the feelings, the emotional level, and connecting on a deeper, more meaningful connection. I think that's I went silent because my wheels are turning, but I think it's an interesting piece of the strategy. And I would encourage us all to open that conversation. And I would love to talk it further, and maybe on social we'll find it. So with that, I'm just taking a look at the time, and I want to be conscious of our time together. And I have 2 more questions for you. So the first one is around your employees. Just from being on this interview with you, your enthusiasm and your passion, it bleeds through the microphone. And it's been a pleasure speaking. And I'd love to know, you're such an inspirational leader. What are some of the things that you would love to give, or what you want for your team or your employees of user testing? If you could give them, a gift, a lesson, words of wisdom, or even just good wishes for them, what would you want to say?
Let's see, words of wisdom. So, one thing that I've learned a lot in life is how much really in your head it controls so many different things, and you can call it your attitude, but how you choose to respond to something changes everything. We sometimes at user testing call it positive intent, but I think it's even more of this concept that anything that happens to you, you can always choose to think about it in a negative light, choose to think about it in positive. And the funny thing is, people have this thought that being happy or seeing things positively is the easy way, but oftentimes it's actually the harder way. And it's a muscle, I believe. You have to keep practicing, and you have to have the baby steps. We had our keynote speaker, Neil Patricia. He's awesome. He has this TED Talk, 3 A's of Awesome. So go check it out.
3 A's of Awesome.
And I just feel like oftentimes when things feel so chaotic and out of control, which is what 2020 was all about, I feel like for so many people, and still is, right? You're talking about, people, we like to think it's over, but so many people are it's kind of the same thing, I'm here and the kids are running around and work is crazy. And I feel like when you feel so powerless and out of control is where it gets hard. And if you really believe that you can choose how you're going to respond to something, that is what you have control over. Who cares what they really meant? I'm going to think it this way, and it gives you power over, and don't let people whatever they say impact how you behave, and impact, because that gives them too much power. And I feel like once you feel in control of your life and your attitude, it changes everything. It changes your work dynamic, your home dynamic. And, it's hard to have a happy work life if you don't have a happy life, and vice versa. And so the more that you can kind of have that on your own, right? Like they work towards it. It's a worthy goal.
Michelle wins your TED Talk. No, it's great advice. And I full-heartedly believe that, something that we practice at Oktopost, we practice that in the house as well here, is, kind of changing our phrasing. One, finding the meaning in the mundane, which I also think goes along with what you're saying, right? Especially these days. And two, we've changed our phrasing. Instead of having to do something, we train our minds to say we get to do it. And just hearing you speak about that, just let us know when your TED Talk is, because we're all going to be tuning in. But my last question for you, right? So the world is a very connected place. Social media is, one of our favorite places to be, to share thoughts and ideas, and we can learn a lot about you on LinkedIn. You have great posts, but I'm hoping you might be able to tell us on this podcast something about yourself that we are not able to find or know on LinkedIn, or if we Google it, we are not going to find it, that it's only for listeners tuning in today.
We did for our company kickoff last week. We did a whole TV theme, and one of them was called "We Have a Full House." So then we had everyone break down and have like the 10 things you don't know about me as conversation starters. So I'm trying to think about like some of those things, but one thing is, we talked, I don't know how much, I try to keep in some sense my personal life out of my professional, in some sense. I'm a mom, happily married. I've got a 9-year-old and someone who's my son is about to turn 5. We're birthday buddies.
Aww.
So that's new. Our birthday's coming up. Mine's the 6th and his is the 7th.
Well, happy early birthday from us here at Oktopost.
So I don't normally share that, but I got my birthday buddies, and maybe one thing I've shared. Since I started traveling pretty early in life, and if you ever see this video, you'll see I've got like the little thing of the Space Needle. So I live in Seattle, but my headquarters is actually in California. So I've been kind of a remote leader for a lot of my career. So I travel. And I traveled when I first started in the industry, and the longest I have been in one city is 6 weeks since 1999, other than my 2 maternity leaves. But those, I only went 4 months before I hopped on to go. And some of them were just for personal stuff too, just for fun.
Why not?
But 4 months was the longest I had been in one city until this last year. And so last year was a huge change.
Wow.
There's some positives. My son occasionally will say, "Mama, I kind of like the pandemic." Or you and he goes, "Is you're home all the time, Mama?" And I'm like, "Oh." So like there's
Full house moment.
Positives, and I've appreciated it. So can't find that one on LinkedIn.
Well, those are some great fun facts. And let's hope that the world opens again and you can travel, bring your kids with you, and the world reopens. But that's actually pretty impressive to be traveling for so much. And when you think back before the pandemic on how much we all traveled, it was all the time. I mean, I
loved it.
Yeah, exactly. I loved it too. It's how I saw most of the world. So with that, Michelle Huff, thank you so much for your time, for your insights, for your words of wisdom. For everyone listening, feel free to connect with Michelle on LinkedIn, follow her. She really does give some great insights. User Testing is doing some pretty interesting things, I know, from following Michelle and keeping my eye on that. But again, thank you so much. And I wish you a fantastic rest of your day.
You too.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for tuning in to the Radically Transparent podcast, brought to you by Oktopost, the only social media management and employee advocacy platform architected for B2B. I'm Jennifer Gutman, your host and director of social strategy here at Oktopost. And if you love today's show, we'd love if you subscribe, rate, and give a raving review wherever you get your podcasts. For more discussion on B2B social media marketing, be sure to follow Oktopost on LinkedIn. And of course, to gain access to all our free social media marketing and employee advocacy resources, head on over to our website, www.oktopost.com. Until next time.